Hey everybody, this is Brian Aiello. On episode 39 of Origin Stories on Creativity, I talked with Stephen Morris. He is a former priest of the Eastern Orthodox religion. He studied at Columbia University, he studied at Yale. He is a fantastic person to talk to if you're interested in urban fantasy fiction. He has in-depth knowledge of werewolf lore. He is writing a trilogy of novels on werewolves in the Czech Republic. He's writing a story on vampires in Ireland. He talked to me about a bridge building, occult engineering in Prague. I had a really great time talking with him. It was a really great conversation, and with no further ado, I'll let Stephen Morris take it away.
I grew up in Seattle and went to grade school and high school. And then I was determined for college that I was not going to live at home. And so every place I applied to college either required freshmen to live on campus or was far enough away that there would be no question that I had to move. And when I got the acceptance letter from Yale, I booked my airline ticket and got on a plane and came back east. The first Christmas of my freshman year, my first Christmas on the East Coast, I was from New Haven down to Washington, D.C., and I got out at Grand Central to go over to Penn Station and change trains, and I looked around on Vanderbilt Avenue and 42nd Street and thought, this is what a city is supposed to be like. This is home.
Oh man, I did that exact same thing actually. Dead, nothing, snow everywhere. It's desolate. There's not one person out, but the city is still there. It's just beautiful, right?
Yes.
So, are you allowed to talk about your entrance in the Skull and Bones, or?
Well, I lived right across the walkway from Skull and Bones, so I went past it every day. And once the door was open, and I peeked inside, and it was just very dark. There was a hallway and another door, and a couple sconces that were pretending to be torches. But I don't think what I'm more excited about is that I lived also across the walkway from where Cole Porter lived.
Oh,
so at the piano bar that I hang out at on Wednesday happy hours, whenever we sing a Cole Porter song, I know that guy.
Oh, that's interesting. So what a great school. My wife went to Columbia, so it's neat, the history. I mean, basically we went to one of the schools that started America's education system. And do you get a sense of the history when you walk across campus as a student at Yale?
You do. You get, because there are all kinds of plaques that say, Nathan Hale this and so that, and a lot of it predates the revolution, that the school is older than the United States. And not too many of the original buildings are left because, most they were wood, and that wood doesn't last very long, and they've been replaced by brick. But a lot of the brick buildings are from very shortly after that period.
What did you get your degree in at Yale? Was it medieval history?
Medieval history.
What was your plans when graduating? Were you going to be a historian?
I intended to become an Eastern Orthodox priest, and I figured that the more, rather than spend 4 years studying theology and then another 3 years doing a Master of Divinity, I would indulge my first love, which is medieval history, and take several classes up at the Yale Divinity School, and then get a Master of Divinity on top of that from another school, just to sort of broaden my experience.
Well, as far as being a fantasy writer, I mean, you're going in the right direction. I mean, that's so great. You have a basis in religion, you have a basis in history. You're going in such a perfect direction to produce fantasy. Would you agree?
Yes, and all the fantastic elements in the novels are also based on actual medieval or pre-Renaissance cult beliefs and practices. So it's the real deal. My love of history informs everything that I write. So my books can also be considered recipes. But if you really want to do these things, this is how people actually did it. It's not pretend Latin or anything like that.
So what do you mean? Let's break that apart a little bit. What things are we talking about? Oops.
Well, like in my Come Hell or High, a witch curses the city, a witch curses Prague in the 1350s, and then the curse works its way through the life of the city and gets reawakened in 2002, so that all the magic is based on either Czech folklore or Czech legend, Prague history, and medieval occult beliefs. So that, say, there's all kinds of movies that tell you how you can become a werewolf, but those don't usually match what the original stories say how you become a werewolf. Or
how do you become a werewolf? What do the original stories say? Because I know there are some...
In the Roman stories, the Roman folk tales, if you took off your clothes and put them in a pile by the road and then peed in a circle around them, that would turn you into a werewolf.
Interesting. Is there any reasoning behind that? Or was it just, the Romans were interesting. There's a lot missing in their magic and pantheon.
Yes, I think as far as like the peeing in a circle around your clothes, that probably somebody saw a wolf relieving himself along the side of the road in the hedges, and that eventually led to the peeing. If a human pees along the side of the road, it can turn you into a wolf. But there's the classic Roman definition of magic, which is basically any illegal religion is magic. Any foreign religion is magic. Because if you practiced a foreign religion, you were presumably engaged in treason against the state. And so you were trafficking with other people's gods, which from the Roman point of view were devils.
Yeah.
When the Christians came along, they adopted that same rule that the magic was absolutely forbidden, but the only consistent definition of magic was illicit religious practice. So a lot of what they thought of as magic is not what we would think of as magic, and things that we think of as magic, they thought of as science. So to actually say is a very slippery. A very slippery definition.
It's very interesting to me. The Romans would incorporate religions into their religion too, or they conquered somebody, they would adopt things left and right, wouldn't they? I mean, they like something, yes. They would incorporate slaves into their population eventually. I mean, they couldn't keep people down for too long. I mean, adopt cultures and things of that nature. So eventually it would become over a period of time.
Say the Persians. The Persians practiced magic according to Roman definition, because that was not a religion that was allowed. That was sanctioned in the Roman Empire. The Celtic religions were sanctioned. Jewish religion was sanctioned. A lot of things that did get incorporated into the Roman culture were allowed, and therefore
obviously the big one's Christianity. That was eventually allowed by the
right, but until it was allowed, the Christians were charged with practicing magic.
Yeah, that's interesting. So back in 1300s, you peed in a circle around your clothes and you became a werewolf, or no?
That was one way to do it. You could also have a belt made of wolf skin, or a belt or a wolf hide that had been treated with a special concoction of herbs and magical ingredients. And then if you drape that across your shoulder, that could turn you into a wolf.
So really, it was very easy to become a werewolf. Somebody could set you up to become a werewolf. You could just one day wake up, become a werewolf.
Yes.
And full moon, all of a sudden you're killing babies and whatnot. Naked,
yes,
waking
up. Yes, the problem was that the official stance of the church was that They definitely hunted witches. Witches existed, but the official stance on werewolves was that thought they were a werewolf was deluded and suffering hallucinations because a human soul could not within an animal body. So that shape-shifting was not, they said, was a logical fallacy.
So basically, if there was a shapeshifter, it was not human because no human could live in an animal body.
Right, and that basically if a human became an animal, it was the equivalent of death because your soul would.
You're no longer a human. You no longer contain a human soul.
Right.
Oh, wow.
That's
okay.
Right. And of course, the fairy tales all presume that this human soul continues in the body because, like, when the prince is condemned to be a frog or something, part of the punishment is knowing that you've been forced into this non-human shape.
So you're no longer human.
But yeah.
So let me ask you, this kind of gets off the subject of werewolves, which I understand we're kind of talking about one of your novels, but it just made me think about vampires and the idea that a vampire and a bat are very similar. If you're a vampire, that you're no longer human, right? Is that where the non-human aspects of vampirism comes from? Well,
vampirism, in its classic estimation, is the undead. Somebody has died and therefore is no longer human in the same way that we think of human, and they keep coming. They won't stay dead. They keep coming back, and they support themselves on the blood of the living. And a lot of cultures, wolves and werewolves go hand in hand with vampires because wolves hang out in cemeteries, and that's where vampires come from. So I'm also working on a novel right now that involves vampires in Ireland. And
vampires in Ireland?
Yes. And a lot of vampires in Ireland are a way to write social history. There's a story in Waterford from the southeast of Ireland where a young woman is in love with a shepherd and forced by her father into an arranged marriage with this much older, wealthy man. And he beats her to death. And then she comes back from the dead, kills her father, kills the husband, goes on to seduce and kill men. She's indestructible. She can be pinned back in her grave if you build a small tower of stones on the right grave, but sunlight and garlic and all those things don't affect her.
Let me ask, are you able to trick somebody into being a vampire like you can with a werewolf?
Not so much trick, but you can attack. You can arrange things in such a way. So, like, one of the ways to become a vampire is if a cat jumps over your corpse before you're buried. So if you want someone to become a vampire, you can just arrange to bring a cat to the wake and so that it jumps over the corpse.
And that's their vampires.
That's one way to make a vampire.
That's so interesting. That's so fascinating how, I don't know. We were pretty dumb up until the 20th century, weren't we? In terms of superstition.
The world operated in a very different way, yes.
How do you explain it? How did we go from this skittish species? Did we go from those people, these really overly suspicious people trying to make sense of their world, to the people that we are today?
Well, I think our tools got more sophisticated. What we primarily rely on is vision and being able to observe certain cause and what seems to be their effect. So originally the vampire stories seemed to be rooted in tuberculosis, that somebody would die and then their family would start coughing up blood and looking faint and anemic. And the original stories where the vampire came back to attack family and to live off their blood. And so it was clearly like some kind of disease, probably tuberculosis, that was being passed around through intimate contact. But now that we have microscopes and can see germs and things that are much smaller, a way to explain the same phenomenon. I think that people always saw the world as a very personal, animate place. And nothing was ever just the way something always had to be caused by someone.
Yeah.
So you needed to look around for who was responsible for this. And now we've just gotten more sophisticated.
Yeah. Death is scary. Death is horrible, right? It affects everything. It's something that you go from very healthy to all of a sudden it's a very painful experience to watch somebody go from healthy to not healthy and in the grave. and scary and all
Yes.
that horrible stuff. I mean, there has to be something evil happening and malign.
Yes, and it can be very fast, inexplicably fast.
And it's not, I mean, yeah, it
You have to
happens
be-
a lot, but it doesn't happen a lot to your intimates. It doesn't happen very often to the people that you love. And once it does, it's got to be very affecting.
Yeah. Yes. And it used to happen a lot more often. There was a lot higher child mortality. People didn't live as long. You were old if you lived past 40.
That's very, very telling. So we're writing about a witch that gets, did you say frozen from the 13th century and then unfrozen in the 20th century?
Well, she's executed in the 1300s, and as she's being burnt at the stake, she curses the city. But then a young woman finds a way to stall the curse, and then someone else comes along in 2002 and meets the ghost of the witch and takes the brakes off, reawakens the curse.
What do you do now with the magic that the witch has in 2002? How do you explain it? Does she have power in 2002? How does she suffer the modern?
She tapped into the old god, or an old devil that used to be worshipped where the city of Prague was built, and he is eager to win back his territory. So she's opened the door for him to come back into the world. And a small handful of professors at an academic conference, these professors have studied folklore and folk magic for their entire lives as an academic discipline, but they realize what's going on. And so they have to suddenly become practitioners of what they've studied and try to stop the old god from coming into the world. And there's a nasty Jesuit and an Irish vampire woman there to help the curse along. So there's 3 bad guys versus a handful of professors trying to stop them. And the flood that nearly wiped out Prague in 2002, in August 2002, is actually, in my book, the result of the bad guys that the curse is trying to wipe out the contemporary city so that the old god can come back and take over the territory.
That's wonderful. I love it. I write with this idea of mythology as well. Gods coming in and trying to reclaim what they had at one time. And that's basically what you're trying to do as well. A jealous type of situation, trying to reawaken and reclaim what they had.
Very much. Yes.
I really like that a lot. So we're going back. We're looking at an ancient world that has lost its power, that at one time was all-consuming in 2002. Is this a continuing series or is it a standalone?
Well, I wrote one big book, and then the publisher said it won't fit into one set of covers, so it instantly became a trilogy.
That's good. That's neat.
Yes. And then one character, the book I'm writing now about the Irish vampires is a spin-off. One of the professors from the conference who was fighting the bad guys in Prague goes home to Ireland and has to deal with the Irish vampire woman on her home territory.
As an author, as an academic, as somebody who spent his life studying all of these people throughout history, do you find yourself bored writing the same characters and the same through line, or do you find it neat that you get to explore these same ideas through the various novels?
I think it's very exciting to be able to follow this character development over a series of books, so that you have a greater chance to see how this person will react in a variety of different circumstances, not just within one set of covers, but over and over again. You get to know their quirks, you get to know their idiosyncrasies, you get to know their social circle, and
do you get to live vicariously through this one character?
Of course. I mean, they're a little bit of me, but then we get to know each other.
Yeah. When you're writing something like that, what do you think? I mean, that's hard to do, the fallibilities of the human spirit. I mean, how do you write something that can resonate with a reader enough to where they want to flip the page and follow this guy through, 1,500 pages worth of prose?
Well, you can't, the first draft, you can't think so much about the reader. You think about yourself and what's a story that I would want to read. And like in Manhattan, if you're 1 in a million, there's 8 of you. So if you write a story that you want to read, there will be other people that also want to read that same story. Well, if this person is partly you, how would you react in this situation? And if this person is partly other people, how would they react in these situations. And then when you go back to edit and to revise, then you can the reader and say, is this repetitious? Is this does this need to be tightened up? Does this need to be clarified? Does this sound too much like a tour guide? Need to be fixed? Stuff like that.
So your character that you're following into this your first trilogy and into the second series, he's your main hero in the first trilogy, or do you follow various protagonists?
In the trilogy, it's kind of an ensemble piece.
It's an ensemble.
He's one of the main good guys.
And the villain, the 1300s, the 14th century witch. Is she the only villain?
No, she has a cohort. She has these
a human cohort, right?
So they're all gone. The human cohort are all gone by the end of the trilogy. So
well, let me ask about your where do you get your inspiration from, besides history and obviously your religious background? Are you looking at the occult and paranormal, or are you looking at literature?
Kind of a combination of both. My werewolf novel, Stormwolf, is set in Estonia in the 1880s and 1890s. And for that, I was looking at a whole collection of different werewolf stories. And incorporated bits and pieces of those into the novel. Sort of each chapter becomes almost a short story that involves this Baltic and German werewolf lore. The Irish one that the Irish vampires, it's a combination of history and folklore, and just how would those things impinge on in the modern world?
I would think that stuff is actually publishable too. Collections of that type of lore written out and in story form would easily be published. Right? I mean, I bet your publisher is begging for a book on that stuff.
From your mouth.
Actually, I did an interview yesterday with a wonderful woman by the name of Varla Ventura, who actually publishes that type of literature, collections of the paranormal and ghost stories and things of that nature. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it, and she's actually writing books on that pretty much same subject matter.
Good for her. Yes, somebody could do like an extended version of the Grimm's fairy tales. I mean, that's exactly what people like to read.
Is that what you found, that a lot of the stuff is parallel to the Grimm's, to the fairy tales that were being published at that time?
Yes, because a lot of what the Grimm's were collecting were those same sources of old stories that had been passed down.
The oral traditions.
The oral traditions, and they wanted to capture them before they were lost. And they were actually document the ways people spoke, and so they wanted them to tell stories where they were more concerned about the story they were telling rather than paying attention to how they spoke, because the Grimms were interested in local idioms and dialects and didn't
they wrote the German language. Actually, it's really interesting.
Yeah. So the fairy tales were a good way to get people to pay more attention to the stories themselves rather than to how they were speaking.
What did you learn about where? I find it so fascinating. It's just it's tough for me to ask the questions that I really want to ask to get you to tell me. I want you to tell me all the werewolf stories. Go.
Read Stormwolf.
Stormwolf, huh?
Yes.
I just find it interesting that they're not the same, obviously.
No,
they're not.
No.
I mean, you're going to find so many variations. I mean, the idea that there's a werewolf story in ancient Rome is just mind-boggling to me. And the idea that it's so easy to become a werewolf that you put your clothes on the ground and just pee in a circle around it. It's just like, okay, I'm going to do that tonight. I mean, is there a full moon when you do this? Or, I mean, tell me the particulars. Do I have to chant? No.
No, originally, the moon didn't have anything to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. It's just easy. I can see every Roman's out there trying to pee in a circle around their clothes and become werewolves for a night. It's like, why not?
See, that was Caesar's problem. If he had done that, he wouldn't have been assassinated.
Right? I mean, you could have magical powers, buddy. Knives wouldn't matter to you.
That's
that
right.
Tu Brute would have a totally different meaning today. There'd be no great Shakespeare play named Caesar or Julius Caesar.
It would be a completely different story.
Yeah, right. Instead of being stabbed to death, he eats a bunch of senators.
Yep.
I don't know. It's so interesting. It's so fascinating. So, Stormwolf, and that is your werewolf novel.
Yes.
And what's the story there?
In Estonia is one of the rare places where werewolves were good guys and heroes, and everybody knew who the local werewolf was because they could fly and they would drive away the storms that would otherwise devastate the farms on the ground, which would result in starvation when winter came. The last werewolf in Estonia 1890s inherits the wolf skin from his grandfather and is given all the directions for keeping control of the wolf magic, which he inadvertently, of course, breaks the rules and becomes a killer. He leaves home, finds someone who can save him from himself. There's very few people left who know the old magic and know a way to reverse that he's got himself trapped in. So he makes his way from Estonia to Latvia to Lithuania to Poland to Prague, who can rescue him. And along the way, he encounters these monstrous, these vicious killer werewolves who are preying on the innocent. So as the good werewolf, he tries to, in each place, he tries to protect the innocent while fighting against the vicious, monstrous werewolves, while also looking at the same time for someone restore him to his own true humanity.
Do you have a connection to the Czech Republic?
I started going to academic conferences in Prague in 2001, and I fell in love with the city about a dozen times since.
It has an old medieval quality to it, doesn't it?
It plays ever. It's an entire medieval city that survived. It was never burnt. It wasn't bombed in World War II. It's stunning, and a lot of it was saturated with folklore and legends and history, like the famous stone bridge that crosses the river, that was originally the reason it became such a marketplace and the cultural capital of Europe for 100 or 200 years. That bridge was built to be an occult masterpiece to protect the city. Magic that was built into it as it was being constructed.
Well, what kind of magic?
There are various plaques with palindromes along the length of the bridge to confuse the devils. In and of themselves used to be considered magical artifacts because they connect worlds. In fact, the original word for priest in Latin is bridge builder, pontifex.
The idea they used eggs and physics to keep the thing from crashing down. Amazing.
Yes, it's fascinating. They built palindromes into the structure of the bridge. So there's a series of plaques along the way that read the same forward and backwards, and that's to confuse the devils so that they stop to read it and try to figure out what it means and why it means and why it reads the same forwards and backwards. The construction started in July in 1357, which is also a palindrome when you write it out European style. So that also reinforces the strength of the bridge. They used eggs. Eggs contain all four elements that alchemists were interested in. So that.
What are the four elements? Obviously, water, earth.
Earth is the shell, water is the white, the yolk is fire, and the membrane inside the shell is air.
Interesting.
There's this one story that a village wanted to make sure their wagon load of eggs didn't break, so they sent hard-boiled eggs.
That defeats the purpose.
Yes, it does.
How did we survive? I just don't understand it. I really don't. How are we here? It does not make any sense. It really doesn't. Honestly, I heard a story also about I read Sapiens just recently, which is a fantastic history of us as a species. And long ago, millions of years, when we first discovered fire, we decided it was a good idea to just burn grasslands, because not only did it cook everything, but it also drove off dangerous species of predators, lions and what have you, snakes or whatever.
Right.
But it also wasted food. I mean, it cooked everything, and we'd fill ourselves with whatever was around that was edible. But anything that didn't last, we couldn't store, it would just rot. It'd stop growing, and it would just be dead and rotting out there. And not only would we not be able to eat it, but scavengers or whatever would come and eat what we'd left behind. It just seemed to me wasteful as hell, and also extremely dangerous. Just really thinking about it with your hard-boiled egg comment, how are we still a species on this planet? And I guess, honestly, we probably won't be much longer, being that we're cooking this planet slowly day by day. But I'm sorry, I digress. What were we talking about? The spells on the bridge in Prague.
Yes. So I think you're right. We may do what Mother Nature could not as far as eradicating us. But the construction started at 5:31 in the morning on July 9th, 1357. So when you write all that out, 1357975531, you get a palindrome. And that also reinforces the magic of the bridge. And the bridge itself, simply by virtue of being a bridge, is a magical artifact that it unites two different worlds. And it, as a magical artifact, also bound the power of the old river god, the river deities underneath it. That's one reason the trolls always live under the bridges, because the trolls are the old river gods that are now constrained by the power of the magical bridge that exists, that's been built over their watery domain.
Oh, it's interesting. What are they constrained from, though?
Well, the bridge acts like a chain that manacles, handcuffs, so that they're bound. That they are. And trolls originally are not like short, wet men that hide under the bridge. Trolls were originally goddesses, terrible women that ruled the waters. And there's supposed to be a troll that hides under the Charles Bridge in Prague, in fact, and lures people into the water so that she can drown them. In the book too.
That is really wonderful. Wow. Okay. Cool. I like that a lot. I like trolls. I like the idea of trolls.
Most people trolls as short little dumpy men with three billy goats, but originally trolls.
Yeah. So that's so fantastic. So what else in terms of? I mean, these are fairy tales, and we got them wrong over the last.
They've been sanitized.
What's that?
They've been sanitized and prettified and cleaned up and made palatable for children. But of course, children love the blood and the gore and the original, versions of the stories. Everybody would much rather look at a train wreck than something that's been all cleaned up and prettified. So we do ourselves a disservice.
We do ourselves a very big disservice, because they're more interesting this way, the way they're supposed to, the original way. Right. Where can we read the original versions? Are they actually there, or are they covered in dust someplace in a basement?
They're both. Sometimes you have to get if you get the unabridged original version of the Grimm's fairy tales, you can read about Cinderella's sisters cutting their toes off and cutting their heels off in order to fit into the glass slipper. Or the birds coming to peck their eyes out after the prince rides off with Cinderella. Or Snow White's mother being forced to dance in red hot iron shoes until she collapses and dies. But a lot of times you have to also just know the code and be able to read between the lines. And that just is something that comes with practice and experience, unfortunately.
The research, I mean, looking, yes. Deeping. As somebody, how much education did you get beyond your bachelor's? You said master's only, or did you actually complete your PhD?
I did 2 masters, one in special ed and one in theology. And then I've written the equivalent of a dissertation that was published in 2016 about LGBT folk in Byzantium.
So you have language then, beyond English, obviously.
Enough to read, yeah. And I could not have a conversation with you in any of these.
But you can read how many different languages? And that helps in your research, I imagine.
Yeah, I can make my way through 3 or 4, not easily all of them.
Let me guess. German? What do they speak in Czech Republic?
Some French, some Greek, some Slavonic, some Latin.
So people like you are in short supply. I mean, if you weren't doing what you're doing, people like yourself, if people like yourself weren't doing what you're doing, things like this are going to be lost completely.
Alas, yes. I think the idea of writing popular versions of the original stories and just publishing that is a great idea. That somebody needs. That's one way to save the stories and hand them down so that other people can have access to them.
And that idea is not original. People have been doing that for centuries, and that's what's caused the biggest problem is writing popular stories. I mean, Walt Disney did that. He wrote a popular story, a popular version of the story, and it's ruined it.
Yes.
In fact, that's been what has happened all along. The original version Around the Fire back in the day is not what we've heard. Even the original version of whatever it was is not what we've been. It's interesting because these are oral traditions, aren't they? I mean, the fire version, Beowulf is not the original version that was ever told around a fire. It's just, I guess they're meant to be morphed and changed.
They are meant to be morphed and changed, but people also could memorize much longer texts than we do now. So that Beowulf, the Odyssey, would have been recited from memory in pretty much the way that they exist on the page now. That's to share them around the fire. There was a whole class of people who did nothing but memorize the stories.
But they made flourishes. They changed things. They wanted to put their signature on it. No?
Right. Yeah,
or would that ruin the reputation?
Well, each storyteller may have changed a detail here and there, but people wanted the story that they knew. They wanted the text that they were familiar with, because everybody wants to know what's coming next. And everybody wants to cheer for the good guy and boo for the bad guy, and they want to know, what's times they're looking forward to. They're having, everybody has their favorite scene in the movie. They always want to see that done.
Yeah, they don't want the movie to change all of a sudden. They don't want their favorite scene not to be there next time they watch it or whatnot. Yeah, I get that completely. That's very interesting. That's fantastic. But again, that version's gone. There isn't somebody who has been able to capture that from 600 years ago and carry it forward. The family tradition isn't that story any longer.
Right. So we have to tell them our way now.
Is that sad?
Well, it's different. The stories stay the same, but they change. And then 600 years from now, someone will tell it their way.
So I guess that's true, though, huh? I mean, if we do go the way of the dodo, kind of in a way, our civilization changes because of global has developed the bomb in the next year or so, and we need oral tradition again. If we living in caves, burning bush to stay alive, we will let oral tradition all over again, telling Star Wars sagas into the future.
Yes,
getting it right.
It would be interesting to see how those stories change in the retelling.
There'll be no Jar Jar Binks in any of them. They'll finally get it right.
That's for sure.
So where are you going into the future? I know you have a great trilogy already published. You're working on is it going to be a trilogy, the book that you're working on now with the same character?
It might be. Right now I'm just focused on getting this one done, but I intend for them to, all the professors to, at various points, get a book or two of their own and just have a the academic professors meeting at conferences and saving the world from black magic.
So that's interesting. So you want them to have, instead of being an ensemble piece, you want them all to have their own novel.
Eventually, they're each going to have their own book or two. Yeah, I think the more interesting ones, at least.
Do you find it hard to pick topics to write about, being as interested as you are in such a varied amount of mythology and religion and history?
It's hard to limit myself.
Yeah, I would imagine. How do you pick the things to write about?
Well, partly it depends on what fits with that character. What would that character get involved with? What would be important to that person?
How do you pick your characters?
Yeah, sort of, as that particular moment. Who is somebody I want to get to know better? Who's somebody I want to follow? Who would I like to sit down and have coffee with?
I guess that's true, huh? So these are people that you would want to meet. These are people that you have met. These are people that you sit across the way on the subway on, I don't know, if you go to work in the morning on your morning commute, or meeting somebody for dinner or whatnot. You're interested in who they are, and you write about them.
Right.
Do you write at a certain time every day?
Either 9 or 10 in the morning, or after lunch is best.
Oh, really? Interesting. Do you write for a certain amount of time or word count?
I try to do 2,000 words a day.
Oh, wow. You're prolific.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I don't live up to that goal. That's the...
Is that straight word count on a news story, or is that 2,000 words? You'll dabble a little bit on what you've already written the day before, or that's straight new words?
That's new words. Usually it takes me half an hour to ease my way into writing, because I sit down, I read what I wrote yesterday, I check my email, I read part of what I wrote again, I check another email, I look at Facebook, I type a couple words, I look at Facebook again, and then write a couple more sentences, and then pretty soon I've just been writing for a while. But if I just sit down to write, it's not usually very successful. I have to give myself 15 or 30 minutes to sort of ease into this transition.
That's pretty disciplined. A lot of people have a hard time getting to that point. At the stage that you are in your career, would you say that it's taken a lot of effort to get to where you are, or have you always been that disciplined? When you were at Yale, were you already this type of writer, or did you just... I never thought
I could do dialogue very well. I wrote a lot when I was in junior high and high school, but I never thought the dialogue was believable. So once I got to college, I always focused on nonfiction. But then 15 years ago, anyway, a few years ago, a friend and I dared each other to write a short story for a contest. And I wrote 2 short stories, and they were both accepted for publication. And they were not great art by any stretch of the imagination.
That's not your job to say that.
But it convinced me that I could get dialogue plausible. And, maybe I can do fiction after all.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, no, my question was more geared towards the level of effort that you put forth a day. 2,000 words is pretty significant. Did you come to that gradually, or were you already that disciplined?
Oh no, that was over time. I realized what my process involved, that I needed to give myself this transition period, that I needed to give myself time to start flowing, and that once it starts to flow, you don't want to. I figured out over, through a process of elimination, that what works and what a good target is, what's an achievable target most days.
Do you go over 2,000, or do you stop automatically at 2,000?
2,000 seems to be about the point where a scene is wrapped up, and I'm usually my imagination's exhausted at that point, so I need to take a break at any point, at any rate, and get recharged.
Then you come back at it after lunch, so you're pretty much all day at it.
Sometimes it just flows and you're done in like an hour and a half. And other days.
Oh, really? And then your day is yours, huh?
So, yeah. Those are the lucky ones.
And then you cross the street and you're at Riverside Park for the rest of the afternoon. It's one of my favorite parks in the city, actually. I really love it out there. And about 50 blocks south, you have the Alice in Wonderland statue. No, yeah, you do have the Alice in Wonderland. No, what is it? Joan of Arc, actually. Right?
Yeah, Joan of Arc.
95th Street? Yeah.
And
it's beautiful.
Alice in Wonderland is in Central Park.
Oh, that's true. That's Lewis Carroll. I put my finger in his nose. I took a picture of it. So what would you recommend for new writers just starting out, trying to achieve what you've achieved? The level of interest that you have in your subject matter, your world building expertise.
That people sit down and just write. That it's good to learn about craft and about conventions. You know, the first rule is that there are no rules, but you need to know why you're breaking rules, and that there are certain conventions to every genre, and you need to study those. And then you just need to write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and work with a good editor.
Do you have an editor?
Yes.
As somebody, you're traditionally published. I think I asked you that question and you broke up on me, unfortunately, so I didn't really get the answer. You're traditionally published, correct?
The academic books are traditionally published. The novels are self-published.
Oh, okay. And which do you prefer? I mean, obviously, it's nice having the traditionally published novels, but you get the freedom with the self-published. I mean, is there a preference?
It's different. Yeah, I like working with the publisher as far as they handle certain things that I don't have to bother with then. But no publisher does anything just out of the goodness of his heart as a charitable donation. There are a lot of stuff that you pay for as a self-published author up front. You end up paying the publisher on the back end.
Yeah.
You know, in the form of very tiny royalties. You know, self-publish is a bigger investment up front, but then you get bigger royalties on the back end. Traditional publishers is less of an investment up front, but then you get very small royalties on the back end. So it comes out to the same. The thing about traditional publishers is that you can get into bookstores.
There's more of a reputation. I guess that's where you earn your stripes.
More honor and glory.
Yeah. Well, I guess you kind of get the carryover for that too, don't you? You have the reputation from being traditionally published, and I guess you can kind of cash in on that being a self-published author too, in a way.
Yes. Nowadays, also, in terms of fiction, a lot of publishers won't look at you unless you've published something or published 2 or 3 things on your own already and have some kind of following.
That's my opinion, honestly. That's where I'm at too. If you don't already have kind of an audience and kind of built up a reputation, nobody's going to be looking at you anyway. I mean, you can't go from nothing to something. You have to have
Nobody's going to take a chance on an author the way they used to.
Yeah.
They're not going to, and in either case, no one's going to spend any money promoting an author that's relatively unknown. It's all going to come, any promotion is going to be your responsibility anyway.
I totally agree. I'm with you there. You have to have some career built up before somebody's going to give you something. So yeah, you are an interesting writer. You have an interesting, I'm with you on everything that you're doing. In fact, world building to me is basing everything that you're putting in your world on something already. And the things that you're basing your world on, this mythology, this European mythology, is fascinating. I wish I could pick your mind more, but unfortunately, man, there's just so much there. I mean, there's just so much there. This pantheon of this mythology.
It's an incredible wealth of potential and possibilities.
It's so rich. I mean, just the Roman aspects of it alone, and the questions I want to ask, I can't even formulate. I mean, there's just so much there, and I just want to pick up one of your books and start reading it. especially the werewolf ideas, because I mean, I really haven't given werewolves that much thought because they've been ruined kind of in a way through.
Yes, read Stormwolf. Definitely read Stormwolf.
Do you get into it a lot, the old mythologies in that story, or is it more of a story?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, I mean, the story itself is, you take the Czech Republic, the idea of the werewolves in that country, but do you get into the Roman ideas of the werewolves and things of that nature, or is it more just the story of the werewolf in the Czech Republic?
No, I really get in because each chapter requires a lot of research. So I really get into the Roman ideas don't so much show up in that particular book, but a lot of other like German and Baltic state stories show up in slightly modified form. So, in the research phase, you really get into the mythology and the folklore itself. And then when you have to sort of let it sit and digest in your head for a little while, and then you're able to put something new on the page, and then you become more involved with the story.
And I think that's where you the greatest lessons are with you as a writer, is the research that you do for your stories. And I think that's the greatest takeaway for this conversation, is you have to know what you're talking about. Even with your writing about something as thinly veiled as a science fiction story, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to know the research. You have to do some kind of reading. You can't just make it up on the spot. You have to base it on some fact. And
yes, you do, and you never want to gratuitously offend someone who actually knows what you're writing about, because that's the point that you'll lose their trust.
Yeah.
If they happen to know that this street in this city, there's a house that's that color, and you describe it wrong, they're not going to believe anything else you say.
You have to treat your readers like they're smarter than you.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and I definitely appreciate you hanging out with me. I apologize that we had some tech issues, but we'll iron them out in post, and we'll do this again, hopefully with yeah, and
difficulties.
But we'll get them ironed out. What is going on with your current future, with your future anyway? You have 3 books right now. You're working on your 4th in the current series. What can we look forward to from you?
Well, more in the series. There's actually 4 out. There's the 3 about Prague. There's one about the werewolf, and I'm writing another one in Ireland that follows this. Also, I guess, the 4th to follow up on Prague. But it's the 5th novel altogether. And then there's my Byzantine history books. If anybody's interested in those, you can see those on my website.
Okay, and I'll link that in the notes. Anything in the near future being published, or everything's basically in?
I'm about half done with the Irish vampire books.
Okay.
Hopefully in a year or a year and a half.
Irish vampires. Yeah, there's one bit of history about redheaded vampires. I think that the Italians thought that redheaded people were all vampires. That just always stuck out to me for some reason. I think it was in one of those supernatural books.
Yeah. Red-haired people generally are all good.
Oh, they're all good.
No, red-haired people are generally up to no good.
Oh, no good. Okay. Yeah, that's what I read. And ever since then, I'd look at a redheaded person and just thought, vampire. What are you... I guess this is going to be the most ridiculous question I've asked you all day. What are you reading right now?
I just finished the latest Charles Stross book in the Laundry Files series. The Laundry Files is a series about the occult secret service in Great Britain.
That sounds so fascinating. Is it fantasy? I guess it's fantasy, huh?
Yes.
I was hoping so badly you'd say nonfiction. It's a nonfiction story.
Well, in his world, the magic is all based on computers. Like Alan Turing, I think, or was it said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Well, yeah, I guess it could be. Where can we find you? StephenMorrisAuthor.com and on Facebook. And
what's the other one I was going to say? Oh, and Amazon. On Amazon.
Okay, cool. And I've got your author page, I've got your Twitter, I've got your Facebook, and I've got your website. I've also got some covers and all that good stuff, your graphics. So we'll get all that stuff up on YouTube immediately. The podcast, I'm a little bit behind on, so that could take several weeks to actually upload to iTunes and whatnot. But I'll keep you informed via Twitter. I did get your Twitter, right? I think so.
I think you did.
All right, perfect. So learned here is stay close to the router.
Yes.
And Stephen, I totally enjoyed this conversation. You are a neat guy. I'm so glad I reached out to you. Fantastic. And I'll be reading some of your work for sure. And we'll do this again. Hopefully when your next work of fiction comes out, reach out to me. Let me know in case I miss it, what's happening. So we'll get you back on. We'll do some talking. Even if you don't have anything coming out and you just want to do some talking about your work, you're more than welcome to. I look forward to it. Okay.
I really appreciate this opportunity. This is such a godsend. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I really like talking about this stuff. It's really interesting. This is what I spent my life wanting to learn about. So the opportunity to talk about another person who does this, especially somebody as esteemed as yourself, is just a joy. I really enjoy it.
Oh, you're too kind.
Thank you, Stephen Morris. I really appreciate your time today.
We'll talk again soon.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye. And that was Stephen Morris. Coming up next, I have an Army veteran, Brian Converse. He was a great guy. He writes science fiction. He's been writing science fiction for a while. He's in marketing, so he had a lot of good things to say about that. Guys, follow me on Twitter. It's a BRYAIELLO for updates on both my podcast Mirage, which is speculating on speculative fiction. I do episodes on authors and various topics, and Origin, which is where I interview indie authors and other content creators, and also where you'll see me update my blog or my website with fiction. That's pretty much all I have for you today. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.